introduce Margot Still. She is the History Branch Manager, correct?
Correct.
The Cleveland Bradley Public Library, and one of the local experts on the Craigmiles family, and has graciously agreed to join us for this week and next to kind of give us a peek into history of the Craigmiles family, Cleveland, and all sorts of fun stuff. And I'm going to turn it over to you once that bell stops ringing, and go for it.
Okay, great. It's a real pleasure to be here at St. Luke's. I have a tendency to run on, so I have notes to keep me on track because I can talk about this family for days. This is the house that I work in, known as the History Branch. You may know it as the old library. And just to start out to clarify, John did not build this house. Nina never lived in this house. We're getting to that time of the year when stories start to float, and I can't be on Facebook because I get all worked up. When my father was alive, he would say, "You're not hurting nobody but yourself." I love a good story the same as anybody else, but what really frosts my flakes is when you make up stories about real people that are not true, when the true story is so much better than anything you can make up. So yeah, I get a little huffy this time of the year. I'm sure you know what I'm talking about. And it's such a beautiful day to come and talk about two very intriguing people in Cleveland and Tennessee's history that many people really don't have an idea the impact that they had on Cleveland and Bradley County. This house was actually built by John's brother Pleasant in 1866, and that's a whole other presentation. So that's all I'm gonna say about that. This is what my life looks like. I'm not gonna sugarcoat it, and I'm not Indiana Jones. I'm not American Treasure, what's the name of that movie? National Treasure. No, this is what it looks like, except I don't have all that beautiful curly hair and a mustache and a beard. But I spend a lot of time with old documents and old books, old newspapers. If you ever have an afternoon that you're thinking, I don't really have anything planned, zip on down to the History Branch and let me hook you up with some old newspapers. It will blow your mind. Those old newspapers are so gossipy. I get sucked in. I'll be looking for an obituary or a news story for somebody, and I'll look up and 2.5 hours have gone by, and I'm like, holy cow, this isn't even what I was researching. But they're so interesting. The newspapers that we have on microfilm at the History Branch, we have a couple that predate the Civil War. We have a couple during the Civil War. They're interesting, and you have to go into it knowing that this is like Joe's newspaper, and they ran like 1 or 2 editions. But they pick up pretty consistently not long after that. You have to remember, no radio, no television, no telephone, no Facebook, no Instagram. So everything's in the newspaper. And when I say everything, I mean everything is in the newspapers. I want to talk to you about this gentleman. This is John Henderson Craigmiles. The name may ring a bell with you. As you can see, he was a very handsome young man. He was born June the 7th, 1825, to John and Lucinda Craigmiles. He was the 7th of 10 children. His parents married, are you ready? Age 17 and age 13. Yes. Yes. The family has Scottish roots, but where we first pick them up is in Kentucky. They moved from Kentucky to Granger County. And in Granger County, there is this massive flood. The family actually has to climb out of the second story of their home. They are very close to the river in Granger County. And I guess they were thinking, oh, it's not going to get us. Well, it got them. They're on the second floor of their home. They have to climb out onto the chicken coop, then climb up in a tree, and they are in the trees for 2 days. The whole family, they're hanging onto this tree for dear life for 2 days. People on the banks of the river can see them up in the tree, but they can't get to them. Good times. So needless to say, they decide they're going to move. Once they get down out of the tree, they've lost everything. They've lost everything. All they have are the clothes that they're wearing up in the tree. So they decided they're going to move, and they moved to Greene County. The signature that you see here, that is John's actual signature. And I'm going to tell you how I got that here in just a second. With the onset of the expansion of the Western and Atlantic Railroad in the 1840s, John and his brother Pleasant built one of the first stores in Dalton during the construction of this rail line into Atlanta. In 1847, their brother, William, builds a store here in Cleveland. Now, how William gets to Cleveland, I haven't figured that out yet. Remember the stack of newspapers? Well, that's me. I'm trying to figure out why William came to Bradley County. There's no ties here until William comes here. He may have just seen an opportunity. I don't know. By 1849, Pleasant purchased a large farm for their parents somewhere in the Waterville area. By 1850, John and Pleasant closed their store in Dalton. They had made a boatload of money. You think about it. You've got all these people that are building this rail line. They've just poured into Dalton. There's not a whole lot there. So they are making money hand over fist. Why they decided to close their store is another mystery, because they were making so much money. Pleasant comes to Cleveland. John goes to San Francisco. What's happening in 1849 in California? Gold rush. You got it, gold rush. So John purchases 6 brigs, very similar to the one seen here. He plans to engage in the speculating that is part of the California gold rush. He took passengers to Panama, people who had fell out with the gold rush. He takes them to Panama, then he goes on to places like San Juan, and he purchases for resale things that he can make money on, such as corn, hogs, building material, and of course, demon rum. The Brig Ruth is his largest ship, and this serves as his flagship. He learns Spanish from his Hispanic crews, and he places a lot of trust in these Hispanic captains. Unfortunately, his trust was sorely misplaced, and the first voyage that John does not take with his fleet, the Spanish captains run off with his ships. Sorry, John. He does still have the Brig Ruth, and he continues his business. It just so happens that his brother Greene is in San Francisco. Don't know why he's there. I have my suspicions. I think that he's kind of dabbling in this gold rush business, but can't nail it down. So he borrows $600 from his brother, and he starts to rebuild his, we'll call it, shipping empire. In 1857, John sells the Brig Ruth, and he goes to New York. He has in his pocket a $50,000 profit from the sale of the Brig Ruth, and he branches out into different other business enterprises, making money. John's making money. You know, he really got burned on this shipping thing, but you know what? He didn't throw up his hands and quit. Bummed $600 from his brother and rebuilt his empire. This is Myra Adelia Thompson. Beautiful, beautiful lady. John comes to Cleveland, a fairly wealthy man, and begins courting Adelia. Now, in my head, she's Myra Adelia. I've always called her Myra Adelia. I'm going to try really hard to call her Adelia, because that was the name that she went by. She was the daughter of Dr. Gideon and Myra Waterhouse Thompson. John and Adelia married December the 18th, 1860. Adelia was very talented. She was sophisticated, she was smart, she was very poised, and she was very well connected. She was a great fan of music and poetry, and she frequently composed her own. There's music here in your church that she composed. John is 33 years old. How old do you think Adelia is?
17.
Very close. She's 18. Go to the head of the class, sir. She is 18 years old. This is her signature. So about a year ago, I get this letter in the mail. and I get letters like this all the time. I have found XYZ, would you be interested? Sure, send it to me, I'll come pick it up, whatever the circumstances. I get phone calls, get emails. Here's a written letter, and it's from New Mexico. And this lovely lady writes me a letter, and she says, I have found in my husband's papers a scrapbook belonging to Myra Adelia Craigmiles Cross. Well, I about fell out on the floor. And I thought to myself, this is obviously an older lady because she wrote me a letter. She didn't send me an email. She didn't message me on Facebook. She wrote me a physical letter. So, me being a child of AT&T, my father worked for the phone company for 38 years, I picked up directory assistance. Do you have a phone listing? And Shazam, she had a landline. Thank you, Lord. I called her up and I said, Mrs. X, I received your letter in the mail today. What do I need to do to get this scrapbook? She said, well, I'll send it to you. Oh, thank you so much. I'm so grateful. And I'm thinking, I'm never going to see this scrapbook. Well, saints, let me tell you, that scrapbook arrived by FedEx in about 4 days. The FedEx man brought it in. We were sitting around the table. Some friends of mine, we work together. Lots of times we have lunch together. This package comes rolling in, and I'm thinking, what could this be? I mean, I've completely forgotten about this scrapbook. I opened it up, and all activity in the hardwood wing stopped. I said, take the lunch and leave the room. Nothing is coming close to this scrapbook. It is an amazing, amazing piece to have in our collection. This thing is pristine. It's beautiful. A lot of the things that you're going to see, like these signatures, are in that scrapbook. There's a character we're going to meet here in just a few minutes that is actually the niece of Adelia. Her name is Myra. And Myra was the grandmother of this lady's husband. He was also a historian and kind of a closet archivist. He was very much involved in their local historical society, so he had some working knowledge of how to take care of things, and that's why this scrapbook is in such phenomenal condition. And all I did for about a week was look at this scrapbook. Sometimes when you're doing historical research, you find yourselves becoming involved in the lives of these people. And soon you begin to draw conclusions about them that you can't cite a source on. And I'm the world's worst about this. There's some things I feel like I know, and I can't tell you how I know them. But looking at this scrapbook, Adelia had cut poems out of magazines and newspapers, pictures, pieces of music, things that meant something to her are in this scrapbook. And everything is just perfect. Every page is completely filled. There's nothing that hangs over the edge. Everything fits perfectly on the page. This is not your average scrapbook. I look at a lot of scrapbooks. This is not your average scrapbook. There's nothing loose in this scrapbook, and you would never believe it's as old as it is. It's beautiful. Along comes the Civil War. John actually voted against secession in the Tennessee Convention. His business acumen was recognized by this guy. This is Judah P. Benjamin. He is the Secretary of War for the Confederate States. And this is one of those, I'm speaking kind of evangelistically because I can't cite you a source, but I have a really, really strong feeling that Pleasant was buds with Mr. Benjamin. And I think Pleasant was kind of back here behind the scenes, doing a little shaking and howdying, if you know what I mean. And the next thing you know, John is appointed Chief Commissary Agent for the Confederate Army, and he serves for the entire 4 years of the war. John partners again with his brothers, Pleasant and Green. They're doing a little merchandising on their own. Green, here's a good example. Green purchased pork on the hoof at 6 cents a pound and sold it to the Confederacy through his brother, John, at 11 cents a pound. In 1 year alone, they cleared $20,000 just on pork. Let me roll that over to current dollars. Adjusting for inflation, that's $668,000 in 1 year. And that's just pork. Pleasant, on the other hand, is buying cotton. Remember back in high school when you learned about the Civil War and the blockade around the southern states? So all these southern cotton farmers, they have nowhere to go with their cotton. Well, here's Pleasant on the spot. I'll pay you cash money in gold. The Craigmiles, no flies on them. They did not deal in paper script. They dealt only in gold. So Pleasant has all of this cotton stored on the coast of Georgia in all these warehouses. Well, you remember I said they came from Greene County? Well, guess who Pleasant got to know while he was in Greene County? Who's the president? Andrew Johnson. Yes. So Georgia is under federal occupation after the war, and they won't let Pleasant have his cotton. So Pleasant rings up his buddy, President Johnson, and says, "Yo, Andy, need you to step up. Your boys won't let me have my cotton." Pleasant had all that cotton sold to the mills in England. I mean, it was money in the bank. Well, the cotton got released. As I said, the Craigmiles dealt only in gold. So with the end of the Confederacy in 1865, they were not bankrupt like many businessmen of the time. You know this little girl? This is Nina. This is John and Adelia's daughter. She was born August the 5th, 1864. As you can see, she was a very beautiful child. She was very much a petted child. She was very popular in the community, and her very best bud was her grandfather, Dr. Gideon Thompson. They were frequently seen riding around in the buggy or taking walks downtown. Dr. Thompson even took her on some of his professional house calls. This note that you see, it's from that scrapbook. And it is a very sweet note, and I'm sorry that I do not have the transcription. I have it, I can't find it. I realized that this morning. I'm very sorry. I will get that to you next Sunday, because it's a very sweet note. I believe Adelia wrote this note, but the signature down at the bottom is Nina's. This is the only place I have ever seen this, and it's in that scrapbook. And when I turned the page and I saw this, I'm not gonna lie, my heart stopped completely. It just stopped completely. This poem was sent to a friend of Nina's along with a posy of flowers. Upon Nina's death in 1871, it was returned to Adelia and John with the sweetest note saying, "I too have lost a child, and I know the tremendous pain that you feel, and so I am returning this note to you, and I hope it serves as a comfort to you." Let's talk about wealth. John's a wealthy man. For a very long time, he was one of the wealthiest men in Tennessee up until his death. The 1860 census that you see here, it lists his occupation as a trader with a with a personal estate valued at $25,000. And if you can't see the adjusted amount, that is $836,000. The 1870 census lists him as a druggist, which tripped me up like you wouldn't believe. This man was no more a druggist than I was. But he owned a drugstore. So the census taker put him down as a druggist. His real estate holdings on the census show it at $48,000. Let's roll that over. $1.1 million in real estate. I think this is a conservative estimate. This is a census taker. This is not the IRS. I think that John probably had a lot more real estate than what's reported here. His personal estate is listed at $173,000. Let's roll that over, $4 million, his personal estate. The census also shows the residents of his home include a maid, a teamster, the teamster's wife, and their child. Can't prove it, but I think the teamster's wife probably works in the house. The 1880 census shows him as a banker We do not have any information as to his personal fortune. Notice the differences in the ages. They're reported on the census. John is 54, Adelia is 37, and I love her occupation. Her occupation is given as keeping house. I have seen another census entry. I've only seen it one time. It is not in any way related to the Craigmile family, but I love it so much I have to throw it out. There was a lady whose occupation was given as doing whatever she wants. I love that. John is extremely active in banking, including the Cleveland National Bank, which was founded by Julius Rott. He and Rott travel in a lot of the same circles, and we see them involved in many banks in the area, not just in Bradley County, but reaching back down into Dalton. I think you know this building. In 1872, John began construction on a permanent memorial to Nina, this church. It was located on property adjacent to his father-in-law's house. You can see it in the background. This is a studio or a cabinet card photograph that is in our collection at the History Branch. I'm sorry that somebody wrote the collection number down on the corner down there. We don't do this now. See this? We know better now, but we're not one to judge those that took actions in the past. What's interesting about this photograph is that you can see Dr. Thompson's house in the background. Notice the wall. That is not the wall that you have today. This wall is made from wood. The cornerstone for the church was laid October the 2nd, 1872. The construction was briefly halted by a fire at the Craigmiles kiln, which destroyed 10,000 feet of lumber that was intended for the building of the church. So John gets kicked in the gut again, but he doesn't holler calf rope, he gets right back up. In true fashion, John pushed on, and with the arrival of a 1,700-pound bell, it signaled significant progress on the church. The wall that we know today was added in 1899. This is right around the time that John dies. John was very meticulous, and that is an understatement. He even included instructions in his will in case he predeceased the completion of the church on how the church was to be finished, including how this wall was to be built and where the ivy was to be planted around the church and around this wall. The name of the church was chosen as Nina was killed on St. Luke's Day. The church was consecrated on the 3rd anniversary of Nina's death, October the 18th, 1874. Also on this day, John and his father, Dr. Thompson, were baptized in the church. Materials that were used in the construction of the church were of the finest quality and no expense was spared. The roof was completed with Connecticut blue and Virginia green slate. The construction expense of the church at the time was $22,000. Roll that over, that's $585,000. Upon completion of the church, John begins work on the mausoleum. And this is one of those fascinating things about John Craigmiles that nobody seems to know. And it's one of those things that helped me kind of flesh out who this person really was. So you may or may not know the mausoleum is made out of Carrara marble, which comes from Italy. And there are 2 rail cars filled with Carrara marble that roll into Cleveland. Can you imagine the import tax on this Carrara marble? Well, John was not one who liked to spend money. So he got a bill passed in the United States Congress. Now you talk about sway. He didn't pay a dime of import tax on all that Carrara marble. Not a dime, by congressional order. It's beautiful, isn't it? If you've never been in the mausoleum, go. It's open on Easter Sunday. It's just amazing. I just like to look at it. It's just so beautiful. The building is 37 feet high with a spire, which is also made out of marble. The walls are 4 feet thick, and topped with a stained glass window. It contains 6 catacombs and a sarcophagus from Nina. The doors are solid bronze, and the cost of construction was approximately $20,000. The church only cost $22,000. So $531,000 to build the mausoleum. There is a newspaper report at the time that gives the cost of building the mausoleum at $50,000. However, I cannot substantiate that claim. I think they were speaking evangelistically. With the completion of the mausoleum, Nina's remains are moved from Fort Hill Cemetery to the mausoleum. She is soon, once she is put in the mausoleum, she's very soon followed by an infant brother. This is the last child of this is the last child of John and Adelia. The child lives less than 24 hours and is never named. In 1884, John purchased the Masonic Female Institute, which is located on Ocoy Street. He operated a girls' school under the auspices of the Episcopal Church. In 1887, the Chattanooga paper reported it as having, quote, beautiful grounds, well-appointed rooms, it is well managed, and a successful school. The city owes this institution to the liberality and enterprise of Mr. John H. Craigmiles, one of its wealthiest and most enterprising and public-spirited citizens. In 1890, the same paper reported, too much credit cannot be given to Colonel Craigmiles for his broad philanthropy in founding such an institution of learning in our midst. The care he is constantly exercising in our midst for the good of the school is accomplishing results that will stand long after this generation has passed away. The Knoxville paper was also lavish in its praise of John and the school. Quote, Colonel Craigmiles has built a splendid school for young ladies and will in the spring and summer build an addition to have plenty of room for the fall session. In this etching, one of John's trolley cars can be seen advertising the Female Institute College. And if you look right there, yeah, John started a trolley line. Would that not be awesome sauce to have in Cleveland today?
Oh, yeah, that'd be great.
Yes, it would. It only lasts about 3 years, and you can probably guess why he shut it down. It cost a nickel to ride, and nobody wanted to pay a nickel. So are you familiar with the Philhour Lake property? You know where I'm talking about? Okay, well that was the hot spot in Cleveland. That property was actually owned by, yes, you guessed it, his brother Pleasant. One of the reasons that John put together this trolley line was he would get the business of the girls at Centenary College. They would hop on that trolley and go down to Philhour Lake, and that was their recreation. John builds a beautiful home for Adelia, and it is the scene of many memorable events. This home had 14 rooms, and it eventually is sold to George Hardwick in 1904. It was torn down in 1947. My father remembered this house, and we talked a lot about it. Today, it would be roughly where the Lead Communications building is today. This home was written up in several newspapers, not just local. It was also featured in the Nashville and Knoxville papers and the Atlanta papers. The details and the furnishings reflected the travel, style, and eye for beauty that both John and Adelia possessed. Quote, there is a wealth of closets, linen rooms, and linen presses to delight the housekeeper, and many conveniences that bespoke the thoughtfulness of a kind-hearted woman for her staff. The grounds surrounding the house are picturesque, well-kept, and taken all together. Mrs. Craigmiles' home is a model one. Beautiful house. Hard times hit. In January of 1899, John slipped on an icy stone, and he breaks his arm. His condition is reported in multiple newspapers around the state. Unfortunately, he succumbs to his injuries. More than likely, I think he probably had a compound fracture where the bone breaks through the skin. No antibiotics, no real treatment. He probably had septicemia, blood poisoning. It must have been a really difficult way to die. They're saying erysipelas. It is a very viral infection, and it is extremely difficult to treat. These are a couple of the notices, obituary notices, one from Nashville, one for Knoxville. It's also picked up in the New York, the San Francisco papers, the Atlanta papers, even as far as Florida. Just to kind of give you an idea of the kind of reach that John and Adelia had. I love this. The death of John Craigmiles ends the career of one of the most likable of men. In all the research I've done, I've not read a single negative comment about John. Maybe he had a great PR machine, I don't know. But you think about all the money he was very high profile in the community, you would think he would be a target. But I've never read anything negative about him. Now, I'll go to work tomorrow and read something really vile about him, but thus far I have not read anything bad about him. Now it gets intriguing. You ever heard the expression, where there's a will, there's a lawsuit? No offense to any attorneys or those in the legal profession, but John's will was very exact and there was no question, and now the people start coming out of the woodwork. John's will was entered for probate with a very unique clause. Quote, "As my beloved wife and myself have mutually agreed with each other that in the case of the death of either, the survivor would never marry again." Now remember, who's older? John. Whose will is this? John's. John's 15 years older than Adelia, and I don't think he wanted anybody taking his space on his side of the bed. John's will is heavily contested, and it makes national news. Leading the charge of the opposition is Adelia's niece, Myra. Now, when Nina dies, Adelia's niece, Myra, who is from Texas, comes to live with John and Adelia. They do not formally adopt her, but she wants for nothing. Remember the school? You know why he opened that school? So Myra would have a place to go to school right down the street. By the way, I forgot to tell you, that building is still standing, where that Masonic school was. It's one of the most endangered historical buildings in the state of Tennessee. It's right across the street from the library. Today it's apartments. I'm sure you know the building I'm referencing. There's a Civil War trails marker in the parking lot that was put up by none other than my cousin, Timothy McCoy. Tim does not live here, but he's very interested in our history. John left a provision for Myra in his will, so she wasn't put out in the cold. She contested the will anyway. Here's an intriguing fact. Remember Pleasant, the brother? Okay, so Pleasant has a daughter named Augusta. She's married to a man named Osmond. Guess who Myra's lawyer is? Mr. Osmond. Talk about interesting Thanksgiving conversation. This newspaper clipping from June the 29th, 1901 is my favorite. Quote, "It is currently reported here the Craigmiles heirs will try to break the will of the late John H. Craigmiles. They are coming from North Carolina, Georgia, Tennessee, Texas, and other states. It makes one think of the flies around a sugar barrel. The grounds upon which they will try to break the will include undue influence, incapacity of Mr. Craigmiles, and his subsequent will. It is a question now as to who will get the most money if the suit goes on, the lawyers or the heirs." Can anybody relate to this in current times? Adelia handles all of these court matters with remarkable style. She hits the road. She is a woman of her own means and definitely a woman of her own mind. So she travels. 1901, she goes to Egypt, she goes to Europe, she goes to Cuba, she goes to Alaska. She loves New Orleans, she loves Florida. I'm trying to think, it seems like she goes to Alaska 3 times, and I think she goes to Cuba about 5 times. So she's just packed her bags and she's on the road. Remember the scrapbook? There's all these wonderful telegrams in those scrapbooks. She saved them from her attorneys. This lawsuit about this will goes all the way to the Tennessee Supreme Court. Yeah. And there's this wonderful telegram from her attorneys that say, "Congratulations, you won, it's over." Adelia is a lady with a lot of class. She actually buys Myra's interest in the estate. She didn't have to do that, but she did. Myra had a $50,000 interest in John's estate. Rolling that over, that's about $1.5 million. And Myra bought her out. She didn't have to do it, but she did. Classy lady. Now things get really interesting. I couldn't believe it when I saw this. To everyone's shock and amazement, Adelia remarried in 1910. Go Adelia. The news broke in the newspaper. And here it is. Quote, information of the nuptial event came to Cleveland in a letter to the county register enclosing a prenuptial agreement. It's 1910. And Adelia had Charles Cross sign a prenup. I'm just like, I want to meet this woman. In the prenuptial agreement, Miss Cross retains exclusive control of her property. In another article, it says she will be handling her own business affairs. The agreement sets out that Cleveland will be their home address and their legal residence, even though they don't live here very much. Adelia is 68 years old, and her new husband, Charles Cross, is 20 years her junior. Adelia was a cougar. I love it. I love it. People think my job is so dull. They have no idea. And here it is. I don't know if you can see it very well. See, it says right here, possession, ownership, and control of her property with full power to manage and control the same. As is well known, Mrs. Cross has large property interests in Cleveland. She's paddling her own canoe. Beautiful woman. The portrait on the left, I'm sure you've seen before. This portrait actually hangs in the music room at the Craigmiles house, the history branch. And sometimes I go in there and I just look at it. And it's very calming to look at, and I think about what she did and who she was. Unfortunately, Charles Cross predeceases her. They're married for 12 years. Charles dies in 1922, and he's also entombed in the mausoleum, which I think must be really interesting. There's the first husband and the second husband, and they're not on the same wall. They're on opposite walls. In September of 1928, Adelia is struck by a car on Church Street. Her injuries are very serious. Both of her legs are broken. She has head injuries and obviously has internal damage. She had crossed the street to her neighbor's home, the Stewarts. This is where that she took most of her meals. I have a pretty good idea where that house is, but I'm not gonna say until I'm sure. She stepped out from behind some parked cars. The accident was inevitable. The guy that hit her was like 18 years old. Yeah.
What year is this?
This is 1928. She was taken to the Speck Hospital where she died as a result of her injuries. She never regained consciousness. She is the last one to be entombed in the mausoleum.
So how old was she? 85? 86?
She was 86. Don't make me do math in my head. I'm a historian, not a mathematician. She was 86. All right, out comes the wheel, and here come the spiders out of the wall. Here they come. It should be no surprise that her wheel comes under fire. The article on the right talks of the disposal of $100,000 of her personal property. Let's roll that over. $1.7 million personal property. We're talking about furniture, jewelry, art, and personal belongings, not real estate. Eventually, the estate is settled with the bulk of the proceeds going to Swanee for a scholarship. That scholarship is still active, by the way. There are also endowments, obviously, for St. Luke's, Cleveland Public Library. That's where her picture hangs in the history branch, and other charitable institutions. So this is a small list of things that I've put together that have been directly affected by John and Adelia Craigmiles. There's a lot there. There's more. There's things that we will probably never know. They are the CL and Clyde Hardwick of their day. They are not ones to put their names on a lot of things. I think that there's a lot of charitable endeavors that go unnoticed. We'll never know. This is just a snapshot. I've hit you with a lot of stuff all at once. Now let me tell you the cool stuff. All right, so remember the lady with the scrapbook? I got an email from her Friday night. Dear Miss Still, in going through my husband's papers, I found something else. Please see the attached photos. She has found Adelia's photo album that Adelia gave to her brother in the 1870s. It is exquisite, and the best thing of all the photographs are identified. Would you be interested in this? Oh my stars, it's 11 o'clock at night. I want to call this woman on the phone and say, I'll be on the next plane. But I very calmly hit return. Yes, we would like to have this very much. As a matter of fact, I'm doing a presentation on John and Adelia Craigmiles the next 2 weekends. She emailed me back and said, I'm putting it in the mail today, so hopefully I will have it before next Sunday and we can take a look at those beautiful photographs. She sent me some pictures and my dog thought I'd lost my mind because I'm literally tap dancing around my living room, which is a pretty impressive feat considering I just had knee replacement surgery. But some things you just get so excited about and you don't feel the pain. Anyway, so what questions do you have that I will pretend to answer?
How many are in the mausoleum? How many are buried?
Okay, so you have John, the second husband, Adelia, Nina, and the unknown son. So 5. So there are 2 catacombs that have not been used. And if you have not been in the mausoleum, Nina's sarcophagus is something that is just magnificent to behold. It's about the size of a sofa, and she's a little girl. And that beautiful swirl of marble on the top that looks like cloth, stunning. And a crown with a cross on top of it. I mean, it just... And I know when John and Adelia built the mausoleum, the trees were not like what they are now. So a lot of people miss that beautiful stained glass window because the trees have kind of grown over it. But if you look up and you see that beautiful stained glass window, I think how gorgeous that must have been. The sunlight coming through that stained glass window and hitting all that beautiful white marble. I mean, really. The downside to that, and it's something that I absolutely cannot wrap my head around, is they lived right across the street. Shoot.
Some of the articles refer to him as Colonel
Mhm.
John Craigmiles. Was that from when during the Civil War days?
Yes, it was. And as contemporary historians will tell you, certainly we've all heard of Colonel Corn. Those kinds of things, they just stick. It's a moniker that sticks. I also think it's almost a measure of respect. I could be completely off track here. This is where I get inside my head sometimes. But I think it's sort of a measure of respect for John. Anything else? Is there anything you'd like to, oh, go ahead.
Did they have no children that lived?
Mm-mm. No, they did not. And I don't know why they did not adopt the niece. I'd give a war pension to know, but for whatever reason, because Myra lived with him for a very long time.
And she only bore the 2 children?
She only had the 2 children. She had Nina, and then she had the unnamed son not long after that.
Myra was whose child? Her.
Myra is the daughter of Adelia's brother.
Right.
Isn't there some tale about the stones taking up
Yes.
tones of red.
Yes, I'll be leaving now, yes. That's what I was talking about earlier. It's getting Halloweeny time,
Yeah,
and people like to say, ooh, the blood on the mausoleum. Thanks for playing. No.
no.
Okay, what it is it's imperfections. Marble begins life as limestone, and it's imperfections in the stone that's coming out. Personally, I think it just adds to the beauty. But then you have these goobers that want to say, oh, it's blood. No, it's not blood. The other very popular story that I hear a lot that makes me want to rip my hair out is the house that I work in, it has a tower. And people like to say that Nina's grandmother hung out the tower window crying, prostrate with grief. Okay, no. She never lived in the house. To my knowledge, she never went in the house. That tower is strictly an architectural feature of the house. It's about 30% of Italianate style houses have a tower, so we're really lucky to have it. But it's about the size of a large elevator. I'm 5'2", and the bottom of those windows hit me right about here. So if anybody's gonna hang out those windows, they'd have to stand on a chair to do it. Sometimes an old house is just an old house. But around Halloween, this is one of the reasons why I have to block off the parking lot now. The first year that I was at the History Branch, which would be 2016, for Halloween, some Weaver came along and shot out a couple of my windows. And I kind of had to pray through right there in the parlor that day, because it's going to keep me out of heaven, I'm telling you. Because they got some of the original glass. They couldn't get the replacement glass. No, they had to get the original glass. So now I work with the City of Cleveland Police Department, and I have Public Works come and bring those big construction barrels, and I have to block off the parking lot. I hate to have to do that. I hate to be that person. But the other problem is people park there and they dump all their trash from the block party or from Centenary Avenue. We actually have to close early on Halloween, both the main branch and the History Branch. The History Branch actually closes earlier than the main branch because that first Halloween, I couldn't get out of the parking lot. I had to park my car in the parking lot and call my sainted daddy to come and get me. He said, what? You need me to do what? He said, walk on down to Arnold School and I'll pick you up there. I'm not getting in that mess. So, yeah, and then when I came in the next morning, I picked up, I think, 3 large trash bags full of garbage out of our parking lot. Yes, sir.
What do we know about the Literacy Association Board?
Very little, almost nil. It's on my list. It's on my list. Going back to the guy with the magnifying glass, for every question that I answer, I find at least 5 more that need to be answered. So before you came in and you sat down, had you heard any of this stuff about John and Adelia?
Yeah.
Did you have any idea the impact that they had on Cleveland?
So, yeah.
Yeah.
But back to the Civil War,
Yes,
after
sir.
the war, he was a colonel in the Confederacy. Was it because of their relationship with Andrew Johnson that they maintained their wealth, or how?
No. John was chief commissary agent. He was not a soldier in the field firing a gun. And the reason that they retained their wealth is because they were very, very sharp businessmen. And they did not handle paper script. They didn't take checks. They didn't take Confederate money. They dealt in gold. Gold is universal. Their wealth was landlocked in gold. And that's why they were able to retain their wealth. Yes, sir.
My question is, how did he obtain the title of colonel? What did he do to obtain that title?
I think that he got that title when he was appointed commissary agent. Can I prove it? No. Now let me tell you something else really interesting. So when I was talking to Isaac, I'm glad you brought that up because it twirled a gear back here. And we're just about out of time. So when I came to talk to Isaac about this presentation, a couple weeks ago, I guess, I asked him, well, what do you have in your archives about John and Adelia? Because I know what I have in our archives. So what do you have? And he said, no, I don't really know, to tell you the truth, but we've got these old boxes. And he takes me into this closet where the HVAC unit is. And the archivist in me went, because here's these 3 metal boxes. If you're familiar with a deed box, there are 2 about the size of a deed box, and then there's a great big box. And it's stenciled, the big box is stenciled in gold leaf. John H. Craigmiles, Cleveland, Tennessee. And I'm ready to leap into glory when I see these. And he said, I really don't know what's in these, but we've had them. And I said, this really isn't the best place to store them. And he said, well, this is the only place we have. Well, okay. So I asked him, do you mind? Would you let me borrow these and let me kind of look through them for this presentation? Sure, you seem trustworthy. We know where to find you. Yeah, you can. So I yarded those things home. And I've been on medical leave for 2 months. And so I have these boxes on my dining room table. And I opened the one there's 2 for Adelia and 1 for John. John's is great big, Adelia's is smaller. And I open it up, and there's all of these beautiful, original documents. And I'm like, okay. And I pull one out, and the first one I pull out is her prenup with Charles Cross. Thank you, Adelia. I have had 2 different attorneys look at this, and I'm getting 2 different opinions on exactly what this prenup says. So I'm going to have a 3rd attorney look at it, because it's all of this party of the second part business. But there is an absolute wealth of information, and I have begun to sort these. Eventually they're going to become part of your archive here at St. Luke's. But we're talking original handwritten documents. Amazing, amazing. I'm going to be sharing some of those documents with you next Sunday. So be sure that you come with clean hands. You don't have to wear white gloves, but you do have to have clean hands and handle by the corners. So thank you, sir, for that question. Yes, ma'am.
It says up there that he's president of the Cleveland Woolen Mills in
Mhm.
1880.
That is correct.
So what was the ownership?
Owned by the Hardwicks.
Okay.
Owned by the Hardwicks, but John is president.
Does that mean he actually participated in the management of it?
He is large and in charge. John is not a man who's going to take a title and sit in the back seat. He's going to be right up front in the amen corner, if you know what I mean. I joke a lot at the history branch, and I mean no disrespect, so please don't take it as disrespectful. But there's this very small circle of families that sometimes I wonder why their descendants don't have one eye and steel teeth. Because they intermarry like crazy. And you see this crossover, and you see the same men in business all the time. They're involved in so many different significant businesses in Cleveland and Bradley County. It's a very, very small group of men. They're movers and shakers. And you hear a lot of these big names all the time, like Hardwick. You know, Hardwick's name is everywhere. You don't hear Craigmiles. And Craigmiles is just as big a shaker as Hardwick's.
Having children is about that.
This is true. That is an outstanding point on your part. Yes, ma'am. Anything else?
Margot, I was just going to say, years ago on St. Luke's Day, our Christian Ed director would sometimes bring out little things for us to look at.
Weren't there some gloves?
I think so.
I think that there's a glove over there in that cabinet that I give my eye teeth to get a better look at, that I'm willing to roll the dice and say that's Nina's glove. One of the things as a historian and an archivist, my goal, and I hope I've kind of touched it today, is to bring these people up off the page so that you can kind of see who they were as a person, not a sentence that you read in a book. John and Adelia Craigmiles founded St. Luke's Church. What a snoozer. But when you think about Adelia being a cougar and having her second husband sign a prenup, well, suddenly she just leaps off of that page, doesn't she?
They were
So-
quite engineering
Yes.
minds, weren't they? I read
Yes.
something about the stone wall that it had to be
Yes.
so precise.
Yes, John was, it's gotta be this way. John was one of these people that there's one way to do thing, and that's his
The
way,
right way.
and it's the right way.
Yeah.
Do we know anything more about their education, John and David?
John did not have much education. Adelia went to finishing school. Other than that, I think that she was educated primarily at home. You know, I haven't run the line. I simply haven't had time. My desk has got sideboards on it. But I believe that Adelia's mother came from money, Myra Waterhouse. I believe she came from money. And certainly Dr. Thompson was no slacker. He wasn't standing out on the corner with a cup. You know, she came from money. John was new money. I think Myra comes from a long line, Adelia comes from a long line of old money.
Whatever happened to
Myra went back to Texas after Adelia bought her out. She went back to Texas. She surfaces briefly when Adelia dies to, you know, let's contest this will.
Lake Lane?
I'm telling you.
Well, what happened in his will where he said neither party would remarry, and did she have to do something legal to?
Nope. It's not binding. I mean, you can say anything you want to in your will, you know, but it's not binding. I just thought it was really interesting that John had the chops to say that. You know, they had this is where I'm getting in my head again, but I think they must have had a really interesting relationship because both of them were very intelligent. Both of them had really sharp business acumen, and they were very good with their money. I can't remember where I found it, but I'm going to look diligently for it. But there's a report that Adelia loaned John $5,000 and made him sign a note. Don't you though? Don't you though? Now you know why I go into the music room sometimes and I just look at a picture. Especially if I'm working on something that's really frustrating, really hard, or I'm having a real donkey day, you know, and I'm thinking, I'm going to go to jail in a minute. So I go in there and I look at Adelia's portrait, and she's like, okay, Margot, deep cleansing breath. It's gonna be fine. I also love her jewelry. She had amazing taste. One of the things I'm gonna show you next Sunday, there was a document in one of those boxes that listed the artwork that was in her home. And Shazam, I have found some of it online. And boy, she had exquisite taste. Really, really exquisite taste. So I think we're done. It's 10:30. I was told I had to be done by 10:30. Like I said, I can talk about this stuff for days. I can run you out of here talking about this stuff. So if that you want to think about it during the week, if there's some questions that you'd like for me to research on the family, you can reach me at the History Branch. As of Friday, I was still gainfully employed. So either come by the History Branch, you can send me an email at hbranch, like History Branch, at clevelandlibrary.org. Call me on the phone, message me on Facebook. We have a program this afternoon. We have a local author who's doing a presentation on the big political machine in Polk County, and he will have his new book there if you're interested in that. Then next Sunday we have the Historical Society. Then on the 22nd, which is the third Sunday, this is going to be the last of our centennial home tours, and it is full. It's already full. So I'm going to take a leap of faith, and I'm going to do a tour starting at 2 o'clock of just the History Branch. This is the last known access we will have to the second floor for an indefinite amount of time. So if you're interested in just touring the History Branch, show up at 2 o'clock and we're going to tour. And by the time we're done, the folks that are doing the other tour across the street, they'll be coming over. So thank you so much. It's been a real pleasure talking to you. I hope I said something interesting.